Reality only vibrates back what you refuse to integrate. It doesn't matter how much you try to run, deny, replace, or forget. What is not embraced returns. Sometimes it returns as a pattern you call destiny. Sometimes it manifests as an emotion disguised as a crisis. Other times, it appears as someone who shows up with the exact frequency of what you buried. You can change everything on the outside, but if the internal vibration doesn't change, reality repeats. Not out of cruelty, but out of coherence. We live trying to exclude what makes us uncomfortable. We want to be only light, only right, only elevated presence. But life doesn't honor idealizations. It honors principles. The law of polarity is one of those principles. This law reveals something we weren't taught to see. Everything is dual. Everything has two poles. Opposites are the same essence vibrating at different frequencies. Joy and sadness, anger and tenderness, courage and fear, success and failure. They are not opposing forces. They are degrees of a single energy, and the place you are on that spectrum changes everything. However, since we were taught to judge, we created artificial separations. By rejecting one pole, we feed exactly what we wanted to avoid. Anger doesn't vanish. It turns into guilt. Fear doesn't disappear. It becomes control. Sadness doesn't evaporate. It disguises itself as apathy. What you don't integrate manifests, and what you fight to erase returns with more intensity. Then the universe repeats, not to punish you, but to remind you that a part is still missing, the one you didn't want to see. The law of polarity doesn't demand perfection. It demands presence with the extremes. Everything you try to reject haunts you, but everything you look at with awareness sets you free. Freedom doesn't come from eliminating opposites. It comes from understanding they were never at war. Cold is not the enemy of heat. It's the same thermal field at a different degree, just as light is not the opposite of shadow. It's only the part that has been revealed. The law of polarity teaches that everything has two poles. Everything vibrates between extremes, and every extreme is just a visible tip of the same invisible essence. What you see as success or failure, joy or pain, expansion or contraction, are just different expressions of the same energy. What changes is not the content. It's the frequency at which it vibrates, and that detail changes everything. Because if sadness and joy are the same force at different poles, then you don't need to chase joy like something far away. You just need to learn how to shift your awareness along the axis, like someone gliding along a transparent line. By moving within, you change everything outside. This is where reality begins to reveal itself as it truly is, a vibrational mirror of internal states. But since we were taught to think in absolute terms, right or wrong, good or bad, positive or negative, we forgot that life doesn't respond to judgment. It responds to vibration, and vibration doesn't recognize good or bad. It recognizes coherence. If you vibrate fear, even while wishing for peace, the universe responds to fear. If you vibrate scarcity, even while speaking of abundance, reality reflects the frequency, not the speech. And that's why the law of polarity is such a powerful key. It reveals that you're not stuck at the pole where you are. You can move, not with effort, but with presence and perception. Anger, for example, may seem destructive, but it's just the same fire of action burning without direction. Sadness is sensitivity that hasn't found language. Envy is unclaimed desire for power. Anxiety is expansion without grounding. And healing is not about fighting these states. It's about recognizing that each of them holds a hidden pole waiting to be accessed. You don't need to erase your shadow. You need to use your light to reveal what it holds. And then something aligns because the opposites stop fighting and start dancing. When that happens, you no longer live at the mercy of the extremes. You learn to inhabit the center, and from there move consciously between both sides, like someone who understands the inner compass of the real. This law is like a bridge. It doesn't separate. It reveals the path between the extremes. By crossing that bridge within, you stop living as a victim of what you feel and begin to awaken as a creator of what you vibrate. That is more than emitting positive thoughts. It is understanding the frequency behind every choice, every word, every silence. And that's why the master of the middle never lived in the extremes. He wasn't of the light, nor of the shadow. He was of the crossing between both. The scribe of the gods, the keeper of cycles, the guardian of the universal laws. In the Egyptian tradition, Thoth didn't merely write. He recorded the hidden vibration behind events. He was the consciousness, able to perceive the truth behind the form, the sound behind the silence, the movement behind the apparent stillness. That's why he didn't align with sides. He aligned with the center, because it's in the center that opposites reveal themselves as complementary. It's where hot and cold lose their names and become temperature, where good and evil dissolve and become consciousness, where ego and essence don't fight but engage in dialogue. Thoth teaches us that the middle is not omission, it is power, because only in the middle is there a full vision. Only there can you see the entire axis with beginning, end, and purpose. The law of polarity, when seen through Thoth's eyes, it ceases to be a concept and becomes a path. Between the two poles, there is a road, and on that road, you no longer need to choose between rejecting one side or idolizing the other. You walk, you feel, you recognize that you've been both true, and that now you're ready to be the bridge. And that bridge is alive. It pulses in every non-reaction decision, in every listening without judgment, in every moment you don't let yourself be pulled by the extreme, but observe. Breathe and respond from another place. Though is this intelligence? He represents the human who does not deny his shadows, but also does not claim to them. The being who is not deceived by the shine of light, but also does not hide from his power. He stands at the center of the scale, in the eye of the storm, in the silence between sound and echo. It is at this point that the law of polarity transmutes into wisdom, because you stop reacting and start conducting. Conduct is not control. It is listening. It is presence. It is knowing what energy inhabits the space and what frequency you want to anchor in ITR. The universe doesn't need you to fight your opposites. It needs you to become aware of them. And from that awareness, choose the vibration that aligns you with truth, not just with the emotion of the moment. Though knew this. That's why he was feared and revered. Because where most saw conflict, he saw structure. Where many saw punishment, he saw coda. And it is this clarity that the law of polarity wants to give you. The clarity of someone who is not moved by the force of one side, but by the integration of the whole. You no longer need to swing like a pendulum between two extremes. You can become the axis, and the axis, when stabilized, creates field. And from there, reality responds. But not with magic, with a mirror. Everything around you begins to reorganize itself according to the internal point you have chosen to sustain. Not because the world changed, but because you repositioned yourself within your own vibration. And this is where the law of polarity stops being a concept and becomes a living tool. Because every emotion, every uncomfortable feeling, every internal state considered negative carries within it an unrecognized pull waiting to be accessed with awareness. Anger, for example, may seem like poison, but it's only untapped action potential. It doesn't want destruction, it wants direction. Sadness is not weakness, it is depth without expression. Fear is unheard intuition, and anxiety is the desire for. None of this needs to be erased. It needs to be decoded, because every shadow is a forgotten gift if you have the courage to decipher it. Transmutation happens when you recognize the present pole and shift your awareness to the hidden pole. Not like someone fleeing from an extreme, but like someone who crosses, understands, and reframes to heal. At this level, it is not about eliminating symptoms. It's about freeing the energy that was trapped in the wrong form. It's about allowing the same field that once vibrated scarcity to now vibrate worthiness. For the same channel that once carried pain to now transmit wisdom. But for that, you must not reject, because everything you try to erase, you strengthen. Everything you welcome without judgment begins to dissolve. That's why so many therapies fail. They try to suppress the symptom without touching the energetic origin. They treat the visible pole without noticing the invisible vibrational movement that sustains it. True healing happens when you stop being a prisoner of polarity and become its alchemist. The alchemist does not deny the lead. He recognizes it as raw material, because he knows that it is from lead that gold is born, and it is from pain, from shadow, from failure that consciousness becomes refined, aligned, and elevated. It's not about chasing a fixed state of positivity. That's an illusion. It's about cultivating the ability to move consciously between poles and choosing, in every moment, which frequency to sustain. You're not going to eliminate the shadow. You're going to learn to listen to what it wants to tell you. You'll stop treating it as an enemy and start seeing it as a teacher. Because every heavy emotion is a coded message, and the only way to decipher it is not to judge it. To transmute is to listen to what hurts until it reveals what heals. In that process, you stop trying to fix the world and begin to refine your field. Reality changes as a consequence. People react differently. Situations evolve. Because what you vibrate creates. To create at this level is not to control. It is to tune in. It is to make space. It is to sustain a new state with such presence that the universe responds as a reflection. Healing is not the end of pain. It is the reconnection with the forgotten part of you that still needs to be heard. To listen to what was forgotten is the first step to remembering who you truly are. To remember here doesn't mean to retrieve a memory. It means to feel whole again. The law of polarity has shown you that nothing is absolute, that every pain carries a knowing, that every extreme holds a calling. But this knowledge only becomes wisdom when you stop choosing only one side of life. Because to choose at this level is not to reject the opposite. It is to include the whole and then deliberately decide where to remain. True spiritual maturity begins when you realize that you no longer need to erase the shadow to shine, nor hide your light to belong to someone else's darkness. You can be both. You are both. And that's exactly why the point of power is not in the excess of one pole. It is in the dynamic balance between the two. Wisdom lies in the middle, but not as passive neutrality, rather as active consciousness. You can feel fear and still move forward. You can feel anger and still speak with love. You can have light and shadow coexisting, without one needing to destroy the other. Because what you integrate no longer controls you, and everything you accept as part of you becomes a bridge, never again a prison. That is the great secret behind polarity. Choice does not nullify. It reveals. You choose to be at peace, not because you reject war, but because you understand it doesn't define you. You choose to vibrate presence, not because you never get distracted, but because you recognize where you want to remain. You choose to love, not because you've never felt pain, but because you've decided not to use pain as your language anymore. Thoth knew this. That's why his writing did not judge. It recorded because when you witness what you feel with clarity, you've already begun to transform. Consciousness, by itself, transmutes. And in the end, it's about this: living as someone who remembers they carry everything within, and who can, at every moment, choose not a side. You don't become enlightened by running from the shadow. You become enlightened by crossing the contrast with presence, without exclusion, without denial, with integrity. And in that moment, you begin to change everything. Not with blind effort, not with positivity formulas, but with vibrational presence, the kind that listens to what it feels, understands what it meets, and chooses what it sustains. You no longer need to run from what you feel. You can embrace it. You can transmute it, because polarity is not a prison. It's potential. Every pain carries an energy that, when integrated, becomes wisdom. Every fear holds a strength that, when crossed, becomes direction. Every shadow, when seen, reveals the piece of light that was still missing. And that changes behaviors, changes reactions, changes decisions that were once automatic and now become conscious. It changes relationships that were once mirrors of conflict and now become portals of healing. It changes the way you position yourself in the world because it changes how you position yourself within. This video wasn't content. It was a reminder that you already carry the vibration you seek. You just need to stop choosing a side and start living as the axis. Hermes Trismegistus once said, "The opposites meet and truths reconcile. It is in the space between one extreme and another that consciousness awakens." That is where the point of power is born. That inner place where everything integrates and nothing needs to be denied anymore. Because in the end, it's not about polarity. It's about presence within the oscillation and remembering that your essence doesn't vibrate at the extreme. It vibrates in the silence between them. If this message touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications. That helps keep this frequency alive and expanding. In the comments, write, "I am the axis between opposites." Share it with someone who needs to remember that light and shadow are part of the same path. And if you haven't watched the previous episodes in the series on the Hermetic laws, click on the screen now. Remember, when you become the axis, reality no longer reacts. It bows.